Hey everyone, welcome back to our study of Acts as we continue Paul's journey in custody, but his sure and steady march on to proclaiming the gospel in Rome. As we finish chapter 23 today, let's open with our prayer and we'll dive right into the text. The words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. All right, so we are on chapter 23, and we're covering a couple of verses that are overlapping from yesterday just because it's a nice transition into the story for today. But we are on 23 verses 23 through 35. Then Lysias summoned two of the centurions and said, "Get ready to leave by 9 o'clock tonight for Caesarea with 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride, and take him safely to Felix the governor." He wrote a letter to this effect: Claudius Lysias to his excellency the governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. But when I had learned that he was a Roman citizen, I came with the guard and rescued him. Since I wanted to know the charge for which they accused him, I had him brought to their council. I found that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but was charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. When I was informed that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him during the night to Antipatris. The next day they let the horsemen go on with him while they returned to the barracks. They came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor. They presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he belonged to, and when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive." Then he ordered that he be kept under guard in Herod's headquarters. All right, so where we left off yesterday was Paul, while he was in prison in the barracks, found out through his nephew, again, through this idea of deliverance, not by great supernatural means, which of course are prominent throughout Acts, and which I did want to make sure that I said clearly yesterday, while we don't often see it, is something that does happen in the testimony of believers still today. But the deliverance from yesterday was something that more of us can relate to. Deliverance through something that is quote unquote common through a person that's close to us, and yet deliverance just the same as if it was an angel or a direct miracle from heaven. Paul's nephew, overhearing that there was a plot by some of the Jews who plotted, not who, some of the mob Jews who plotted with the Sadducees, taking a vow, even in opposition to the vow that Paul had made, taking his Nazarite vows as he went to Jerusalem, and also to try to unify the believers. These Jews took a vow to divide the fellowship of Israel solely for the purpose of killing Paul, because of whatever particular reasons that we've talked about endlessly, that they did not like him. And so the word gets to Claudius Lysias, the tribune, and we finally actually hear his name said in the reading today. And then we pick up on the verses we left off yesterday, verses 23 and 24. So Claudius Lysias summons two of his centurions and basically sends almost half of his force with Paul. He is not going to take any chances on something happening to Paul. And now that he knows there's a Roman citizen in his charge, he's not going to take any chances that something would happen to him for this prisoner to be killed or injured along the way by those who are clearly have it out for him. So, as he prepares to send Paul off, he writes to Felix the governor. And we'll talk more about Felix tomorrow because he's an interesting personality in of himself. But what you need to know is Felix can't say it's a direct succession because his position is a little bit different. But to give you an equivalent of who Felix is, he is somewhat of an equivalent to Pontius Pilate. Pilate himself was the governor, although in this case Felix was really more of a greater figure that had control really over. He was a procurator, was his technical title, over Roman Palestine. Part of that role was his role as governor of Judea. But it is important to realize that there are parallels between him and Pontius Pilate, who, of course, as the governor of Judea, was the one who ultimately gave Jesus over into the custody of the Jews in order to crucify him and put him to death. So there's a little bit of implied drama and suspense that's being said when you start hearing about Felix the governor. But setting's different, whereas Jesus, the Romans were totally indifferent to Jesus, save for, like Paul, wondering why are you so angry with this man? There seems to be a little more invested here with the Romans, particularly because Paul is a citizen. They have no concern whatsoever with the religious dialogue that's taking place between the Jews and with Paul, but they are very interested in his status as a citizen. So the Tribune then writes a letter, basically a letter that is a commission that says, I am transferring him from my authority to your authority. And he writes his letter, Claudius Lysias, to his excellency, the governor Felix, greetings. And he goes back through what we already know, but it's interesting how he says it. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by him. But when I had learned that he was a Roman citizen, I came with the guard and rescued him. Well, that's one of those statements that's true to a point. Yes, he did. Once he found out he was a citizen, he did come and basically take him away from the custody of the Jews and got them out away from him. But it didn't quite happen right away. His first couple of investigations did not reveal that. He was more interested in trying to quell the rebellion. He was going to have Paul beaten and flogged in order to teach him a lesson. And so he sort of hides those details. So it's not a lie, but it's a lie of omission, so to speak. There is a lot in this letter. Well, I won't say it out the direct words, but if you've heard the expression CYA, cover your you know what, there's a little bit of that going on here in this letter. Typical politics, same thing that we would see today in some sort of political situation, and this is certainly very political. On the one hand, trying to make sure that the Jews don't go into open revolt against the Romans, but also trying to make sure that the laws are upheld. And Tribune, who is high enough in the military ranks, who wants to try to impress the officers and the rulers above him, is trying to make himself look very good in this letter. So again, he's not lying, but he's leaving out a few important details. It goes on in verse 28, since I wanted to know the charge for which they accused him, I had him brought to their council. I found that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but was charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. There's another echo of Pontius Pilate, because Pilate himself makes the case before the Jewish priests and the elders of the Jewish people when they're standing there ranting and raving for Jesus to be crucified, and says, I find no charge to bring against this man. And he repeats that to them several times. And so that charge is being repeated, or that statement of there is no charge to bring against this man is being repeated now, not by one person, but up through the ladder. We're going to see the centurion who reports to Lysias that this man's a citizen. Now, Lysias, who says, I don't see what's going on. We're going to see with Felix that he really says there's nothing going on. And then it's going to go up another level to King Agrippa beyond that, who's going to say the same thing. So that's being repeated as we go up the ladder. And these are tools that Luke is using in Acts to say that Paul's persecution, that his suffering is because of the power of the message that he's proclaiming. But no one can truly find anything wrong with what he's doing. As he said in front of the Sanhedrin when he was brought, the statement, in fact, that drew a slap on the face from the attendant of the high priest, I stand here today with a clear conscience. I said to you that was partly offensive because it was also a Greek reference, but it was also offensive in the sense, well, yes, you have done something wrong, but we can't tell you what you've done wrong other than we just hate you with this passion. And here is this in the midst. The Romans are the ones who were logical, who were progressing thoroughly through this. We find nothing wrong with this man. And Luke is very carefully also using them to say, as we will see several times in the preceding, or excuse me, in the succeeding verses and passages, that the Romans don't have a vested interest in this. They're not interested in saving Paul because they like Paul and respect his ministry. They are saving him because he's a Roman citizen and they are following the prescriptions of the law. But let's make no bones about it. The Romans are not doing Paul a favor here. This is nothing that Paul has earned by anything by doing his job, but rather the Romans are acting as his saviors, the same Romans who were the pagans, who, quite frankly, throughout the course of Scripture, portrayed in this very ambivalent light at best, and in this very almost barbarian sense in another, ironic because the Romans were considered the civilized authority of the world during that day and age. I just wanted to be very clear, though, that in this particular passage, along with all the others that have been before it and are going to come after it, is this portrayal of God's deliverance, again, being brought not through extraordinary means, but through the existing power and authority that is there, while also simultaneously not propping up this power and authority, say, well, the Romans are so blessed by God because they're taking care of it. An important thing in our world today, because as the argument about presidency, the argument about Congress and the Senate, the argument about who's in power and control, you hear this either or. They're wretched because they're doing horrible things and they're horrible people, or they're doing the work of the Lord and therefore they are to be praised. Well, you can praise the job somebody is doing. You can praise the fact that they might even be following the law when they are following the law, and yet still say that doesn't mean that they are commendable or reputable characters. And that is what Luke is trying to be very clear and very careful and meticulous in pointing out about the Romans. Don't admire the Romans for who they are. They're still the pagans who still come in and rule with an iron fist when necessary. They worship false gods. They have all of these values that are antithetical to the gospel, but yet they are also the ones charged with enforcing the law. And in this case, they are doing it, which is causing the servants of God, particularly Paul in this case, to be protected. So, a little side tangent there, but at the heart of what's going on here today. So in verse 29, here again is Lysias saying, I found he was accused concerning questions of their law, but was charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. When I was informed that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So again, here's a man that is fulfilling the law. Now, before they recognized Paul was a citizen, Lysias was asking the Jews who were present about what was going on, not because of interest in protecting Paul's rights, but because what's going on here. Remember, the first reaction of the tribune was he thought Paul was a terrorist. He said, you're not that guy in Egypt who took the 4,000 assassins into the wilderness and you've popped up here in Jerusalem, are you? You know, his inquiry was more to get to the heart of what's going on so he could decisively and quickly snuff out whatever this problem was. Now he is, by the law, bringing in those who were accusing Paul in order to offer a fair trial before Paul, still holding up this concern for law and order and keeping civic peace, but now it is also to protect the rights of this Roman citizen. So, as we will see, Already, Lysias has somehow contacted the elders within Jerusalem, which we've seen he has the power to convene them when necessary, to say that they now need to go to Caesarea in order to state their case now in front of the next authority, in other words, the next level of the appeals court above me, and that is to the procurator or the governor of Judea. So, in verse 31, the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him during the night to Antipatris. Let me just very quickly throw a map up, partly because it's been so long since we've had a map. I want to make sure you know. So, again, we're in Jerusalem. You see on this map, Antipatris is not that far outside of Jerusalem. Really, Caesarea is not all that far. But when you're leaving at 9 o'clock in the night, it would be like trying to drive to Nashville, in essence, at 9 o'clock. You really don't want to get there in the middle of the night. Or it could be driving to Memphis, maybe even be more appropriate. Yeah, in Memphis, you're not going to get there till early morning. Let's just get you far enough out of town to protect you from this mob, which includes the quote unquote leadership, and then we'll get you up to Caesarea in the morning. So we can come back now. Just wanted you to see where on the map that this was, because now this is the last time Paul's in Jerusalem, his final departure from Jerusalem, and he is now beginning his journey into Rome, now physically. Already spiritually, we've been going to Rome for quite a bit, as we've talked about, but now his physical journey to Rome has begun. Verse 32, the next day they let the horsemen go on with him while they returned to the barracks. So half of the detachment, or roughly half, went out of the city, spent the night with him in Antipatris, and then as they processed on to Caesarea, some of them returned to Jerusalem, but another detachment, the horsemen, stayed with him as a guard to escort him to Caesarea. They come to Caesarea in verse 33 and delivered the letter from Lysias to the governor, and they presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he belonged to, and when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. So it leaves a little bit in question when he's asking Paul, where are you from, and probably some other questions. It leaves that it's not a given that Felix will hear his case. And one of the reasons, just a little preview for what's to come tomorrow, is Felix. I'll give you more history behind him tomorrow, but Felix was known to actually be a fairly rabid anti Semite from what we know of his sources. Now, granted, a lot of those sources are from Josephus, a Jewish historian who obviously would, somebody who commits acts against the Jews is going to be labeled very quickly an anti Semite. But one of the things with Josephus is, for an ancient historian, he actually takes a relatively, and I use that term very strongly, relatively objective view. And what we do know from about Felix is he didn't put up with the Jews at all, and in fact was so harsh against them that he was ultimately removed as the procurator or the governor of the province. So that's just a little note, but for today's purpose, he finds out that I'm sure he finds out that Paul's a Jew. He reads the letter. He sees that there's an internal conversation going on with the law, probably as any Roman authority would do. He just slaps his head and says, these Jews are up to it again, because their reputation within Rome, and the reason that more active persecutions were starting against the Jews, was this very thing. They just seemed to always, especially in Palestine, they either were fighting amongst themselves about something, or they would turn outward and begin to press against the Romans and start to do things that would challenge the authority of Rome. So you can argue anti-Semitic, but you can also argue very, very objectively from a historical point. The Jewish people, particularly in Palestine, were a very high maintenance group for Rome. So Felix probably is just slapping his head here. And in that sense, he might say, I'm not going to hear any of this. And which in that case actually would have probably not served Paul well, because at that point he would have just released Paul, and very likely outside of the custody of the Romans at this point, because he's got this mob that's now going to follow him up where he goes. they probably would have found a way to kill him outside of Roman custody. So again, here is that deliverance theme playing out in a way that this is not how we would have drawn it up. How many times have we said that about God's plan? That's not how I would have drawn it up. But in this case, the fact that Felix does give him a hearing is part of that plan that keeps Paul under protection and allows him to continue on his journey that he's called to go on Rome. And what finally it seems that convinces Felix is when he finds out that Paul is from the province of Cilicia, where Tarsus is there in what's southeast Turkey today, which, as we already saw with Lysias before, oh, you're from Tarsus. So Tarsus has this reputation as being a place, oh, well, the people from there are fine, upstanding people. And there's also some wealth and privilege there in Tarsus. So, today's world, if you come from a place of prestige and power, you probably will have the privilege of having your voice heard. And that's what happens here. When he finds out he's from Cilicia, I will give you a hearing, says Felix, when your accusers arrive. And so then he orders that he be kept under guard in Herod's headquarters. This is not the same Herod. This is a different Herod that's going to show up here in the next chapter. But the point is, as we leave today's reading, Paul is still in custody, but he's gone from an army barracks into the house of the regional king, or into the headquarters of the regional king. So in a sense, Paul is stepping up in status here himself, and very much is now under even more official and stringent protection of the Romans by going to a place that obviously would be heavily guarded as well. So a lot in this little passage. I was sitting here thinking, I'm not going to get 20 minutes on this today. Well, I did, and I probably could say a couple of more things, but I will stop. But deliverance, deliverance, deliverance continues to be the theme. Deliverance for the purpose of bringing Paul where he needs to be, to put Paul in the place where he can proclaim the gospel in Rome. But notice he's proclaiming it as he goes along as well. And he's proclaimed it in front of his in front of his fellow Jews, who many of whom have turned against him, the ones obviously that are not in the church but are in the temple outside the church. But now that forum is going to switch to where he, in his deliverance to Rome and his deliverance and safety, he is going to proclaim the gospel now solely in front of the Gentiles here over the next chapter. So, for tomorrow's reading, Acts chapter 24, verses 1 through 23, and we begin to see the trial that takes place in front of Governor Felix. So until tomorrow, look forward to being with you. Peace of the Lord be always with you. See you then. Take care.